On an ordinary Saturday evening, a London-bound train rolled into Huntingdon station under circumstances no one on board could ever forget. Passengers stepped onto the platform in shock, bleeding, trembling, some people clutching makeshift bandages, others stumbling as they tried to make sense of what had just happened. Minutes earlier, inside the cramped aisles of that train, a man armed with a large knife had moved through the carriages with startling speed, attacking anyone in his path. But what unfolded on that train didn't begin there. It was the final act in a chain of violence that stretched across 2 cities and nearly 24 hours. A pattern that investigators would only understand after collecting surveillance footage, witness accounts, and emergency call logs. Tonight, we open the file tracing the hours leading up to the attack. Hours that reveal warning signs missed, violent outbursts overlooked, and a suspect whose actions escalated with every step he took. From deep within the archive, a single folder sits beneath a strip of black ribbon, its edges worn from frequent handling. Inside are police memos, CCTV stills, and handwritten statements, pieces of a timeline that begins quietly and ends in chaos. The name on the cover is simple, almost ordinary: Anthony Williams. But the events linked to that name are anything but. Tonight, we trace a 24-hour period marked by sudden attacks, escalating behavior, and movements that carried one man from the streets of Peterborough to the aisles of a London-bound train. Each page in this file reveals another layer, another warning, another unanswered question. What happened before the train doors ever closed? How did the first signs go unnoticed? And could any part of this violent sequence have been stopped? To understand the attack that left 11 people injured, we have to go back to the very beginning. The timeline begins on Friday evening in Peterborough, Cambridgeshire. The city was calm, the streets busy with evening commuters and families heading home. But the normal rhythm of the night was broken just after 7 p.m. when emergency services received their first call. A 14-year-old boy had been stabbed in the city center. The injuries were serious enough to require hospital treatment, but the boy survived. The attacker had vanished into the crowd, leaving behind confusion and fear. Minutes later, a second incident unfolded nearby. At a small barber shop in the Fletton area, a man forced his way inside, brandishing a large knife. Customers dove behind chairs. Hair clippings flew across the floor as the intruder moved aggressively through the shop, shouting incoherently, before leaving just as abruptly as he had arrived. Witnesses later described the scene as surreal. An ordinary shop transformed into a moment of terror in seconds. Police arrived promptly, but the suspect could not be found. At this point, investigators were faced with 2 violent attacks in the same city, occurring within minutes of each other. Both involved a man carrying a knife, both involved random targets, and both left a trail of fear. These early incidents would only make sense when viewed as the prelude to what was about to happen. The hours passed, and the night grew colder. By early Saturday morning, another stabbing was reported, this time in East London at Pontoon Dock DLR station. A man walking alone was attacked without warning, sustaining facial injuries. The assailant fled before anyone could intervene, disappearing into the quiet streets. Police quickly began to compare descriptions with the previous night's events in Peterborough. A pattern began to emerge. A man in his early 30s wearing dark clothing, carrying a large knife, acting with sudden, unpredictable aggression. Yet despite these connections, investigators had no confirmed link between the attacks. Each event was treated as a separate incident, a fragment of a puzzle whose final picture had yet to emerge. By sunrise, the City of London was largely unaware that these early incidents were the calm before a storm that would strike just hours later on a train bound for the capital. The pieces were moving into place, and Anthony Williams was already on a path that would end in chaos. As Saturday evening fell, Passengers began boarding the London-bound LNER service at Peterborough Station. Families returned from shopping trips. Commuters settled after a long week. Students found their seats with backpacks in tow. The train moved quietly along the tracks, lights dimmed, screens glowing softly, the faint hum of the engine filling the carriages. Among them sat the man who would soon change the night forever. Anthony Williams, dressed in dark clothing, quietly took his place on the train. For a moment, nothing seemed out of place. There was laughter from a group of friends, the soft shuffle of newspapers, the tapping of phone screens, ordinary sounds of an ordinary journey. No one on board suspected that within minutes, that ordinary evening would turn into a nightmare. Every second that passed was leading to the moment when calm would erupt into terror, and the train carriages would become a scene of chaos and injury. The first sign of danger came less than 10 minutes after departure. Witnesses later described a man standing abruptly in the aisle, movements deliberate and unerringly calm. A glint of metal caught the light, and the realization hit. This was no accident, no prank, no misunderstanding. Passengers froze at first. Some thought it might be a joke, a Halloween prank perhaps. But the tension quickly escalated into panic as a man lunged forward with a knife. Screams erupted. People dove for cover, pressed against walls, or ran blindly down the carriage to escape. One crew member attempted to intervene, placing himself between the attacker and other passengers. He was struck repeatedly, sustaining critical injuries. Blood began to spread across seats and floors. The attacker moved with terrifying focus, carving a path through the carriage with speed and precision. Passengers described the scene as total chaos, shoved against each other, some trying to shield children, others scrambling for exits, while the man advanced relentlessly. The carriage became a corridor of terror, the sound of frantic footsteps and cries filling every corner. Minutes felt like hours. For those inside, time distorted. Every second brought new injuries, new fear. And yet, even in that panic, some passengers managed to help others, forming impromptu chains to push people to safety, applying pressure to wounds, and trying to calm the terrified around them. It was a horrifying test of human instinct, courage, and survival. At 7:39 p.m., the first 999 call was made from the train. The words were urgent, panicked, almost breathless. "There's a man stabbing people on the train. Please send help immediately." Rail control acted without delay, diverting the service to the nearest safe station, Huntingdon. Within 5 minutes, the train screeched to a halt, emergency lights flashing. Armed officers from British Transport Police were on site and boarded the train, prepared for a confrontation. Body-worn footage later revealed the suspect moving near the carriage doors, seemingly calm, almost detached. Officers shouted commands. He did not comply. A taser was deployed, and he fell to the floor as several officers moved in together, restraining him. The knife he carried was recovered beside him, evidence of the terror that had unfolded just moments before. Passengers spilled onto the platform, bloodied and shaken. Some supported friends, others stumbled alone, a few cradling their own injuries. At least one man held a soaked bandage to his head, pressed tightly against the wound to stop the bleeding. 10 victims were transported to hospital, while an 11th presented themselves later. Within minutes, the immediate threat had ended. The suspect was in custody, yet the impact of his actions reverberated far beyond the station platform. This was not an isolated incident. It was a culmination of a violent pattern that had begun the night before and would soon be examined in detail by investigators. In the hours that followed, investigators began piecing together the events of the previous 24 hours. CCTV footage from the Barber shop in Peterborough, recordings from Pontoon Dock station, and images from the train itself were reviewed meticulously. Every frame, every angle, every witness statement was analyzed for connections. Descriptions of the attacker in each incident began to converge. A man in his early 30s, wearing dark clothing, carrying a large knife, acting erratically. Patterns emerged in his movements, his choices of victims, and the timing of his attacks. Police worked to determine whether the incidents were random or whether they formed a deliberate sequence leading up to the train attack. Anthony Williams was quickly identified as the sole suspect. Officers confirmed he had no known links to extremist groups, no history of terrorism, and no previous criminal record that suggested this level of violence. Investigators focused on mental health assessments, personal background checks, and any possible triggers that could explain the escalation. The investigation revealed the terrifying truth. The train attack was not an isolated event. It was a climax of a series of violent acts, each one a warning that went unnoticed, each one a prelude to the chaos that would unfold on the train. Every piece of evidence now had to be carefully documented, every statement cataloged, as the full story of Anthony Williams' Rampage began to emerge. If you're finding this case compelling, consider subscribing to the archive. It helps us bring more files to light. And if you have thoughts or theories, leave them in the comments below. Every perspective adds to the investigation. Within days, the Crown Prosecution Service confirmed that Anthony Williams had been charged with multiple offenses. 10 counts of attempted murder relating to the train attack. 1 additional count for the stabbing at Pontoon Dock station. Charges of actual bodily harm and possession of a bladed article were also filed. He was remanded in custody, awaiting trial, and is currently facing proceedings that will determine the consequences of his actions. Court documents reveal little about motive, leaving questions about why he carried out these attacks and what might have triggered his violent behavior. Police statements confirmed that Williams was not known to counterterrorism agencies and that there was no evidence linking him to any organized extremist activity. Yet the severity and suddenness of the attacks prompted national concern. Authorities emphasized the importance of vigilance and the role of public reporting in identifying warning signs early. The legal process now begins its slow course, as investigators continue to review every element of the incidents leading up to and including the train attack. Each testimony, each CCTV clip, each piece of forensic evidence becomes part of the official record that will ultimately be used in court. The file on Anthony Williams is far from closed. Despite the charges, the motive behind the attacks remains unclear. Authorities have offered no definitive explanation, and friends and family have provided few insights into any possible triggers. Investigators are exploring multiple possibilities: a sudden psychological breakdown, an escalating pattern of violence, or entirely spontaneous actions that culminated in the train rampage. Public reaction has been immediate and widespread. Across the United Kingdom, social media channels are filled with discussions of knife crime, public safety, and the vulnerability of everyday commuters. Rail authorities have increased visible security patrols, while police urge passengers to remain vigilant and report any suspicious behavior promptly. Experts in criminal psychology suggest that incidents like these often involve a combination of personal stressors, untreated mental health issues, and impulsive decision-making. But for those who lived through the attack, theory matters little compared to the raw reality. Bloodied carriages, injured victims, and a brief window of terror that changed lives forever. Communities from Peterborough to London now grapple with a heightened sense of caution. The question persists: could the Friday night incidents, the stabbing of a teenager, and the barbershop intrusion have been early warning signs? Were there missed opportunities to prevent the train attack? The answers remain unknown, locked within reports, interviews, and evidence waiting to be examined in court. The victims of the train attack and the preceding assaults faced immediate physical injuries, but the psychological impact was equally profound. Passengers described lingering fear, nightmares, and a sense of vulnerability in spaces that once felt safe. Public transport, neighborhood streets, even local shops. Medical staff treated stab wounds, cuts, and lacerations, while first responders provided support for shock and trauma. One member of the train crew, who intervened to protect passengers, remained in critical but stable condition for several days following the incident. His actions were later described by investigators and fellow passengers as heroic, a small light amid the chaos. Survivors recounted moments of split-second decisions, helping a stranger, pressing a bandage to a bleeding hand, guiding children to safety, or simply finding a way to move forward despite the fear. These accounts provided investigators with crucial details about the sequence of events, but they also highlighted the human cost of a violent outburst that could have ended lives more tragically. The ripple effects extended beyond the immediate victims. Families, friends, and the wider community struggled to process the attack, grappling with the randomness and suddenness of the violence. Emergency services reported increased anxiety among staff, and public transport authorities faced renewed pressure to enhance safety measures. In the months surrounding these events, the United Kingdom had seen a troubling rise in knife-related incidents. Reports from multiple cities highlighted a pattern: sudden, often unpredictable attacks occurring in public spaces. Communities and authorities alike were left asking how to respond and prevent such tragedies. Experts note that knife crime is a complex issue, influenced by social factors, economic pressures, and mental health challenges. In some cases, individuals without prior criminal records commit violent acts impulsively, leaving law enforcement and policymakers struggling to identify warning signs in time. The Peterborough and London attacks also drew comparisons to other recent high-profile cases, where victims included both passers-by and bystanders who intervened to protect others. Public debate intensified around safety on public transportation, the need for increased surveillance, and the importance of mental health support for those at risk of violent behavior. Yet, despite these broader concerns, each attack carries a personal story, faces families and communities disrupted. The Anthony Williams case sits at the intersection of individual tragedy and national concern, highlighting how one person's actions can ripple outward, leaving a trail of fear and grief across cities and towns. Even as the legal process unfolds, many questions about the attacks remain unanswered. Why did Anthony Williams act when he did? Were the incidents in Peterborough and at Pontoon Dock early warning signs that could have prevented the train attack? Investigators continue to examine his background, mental health history, and personal circumstances, seeking any clue that might explain the sudden escalation of violence. Friends, family, and acquaintances struggle to reconcile the image of a man they thought they knew with the reality of his actions. The case also raises broader questions for society. How can communities identify potential threats without stigmatizing individuals? How can public spaces be made safer without sacrificing the freedom and accessibility that people expect? And crucially, what systems can be implemented to detect dangerous behavior before it culminates in tragedy? For survivors and witnesses, the uncertainty is perhaps the heaviest burden. Trauma lingers, and healing is complicated by the absence of clear answers. As files are reviewed and testimonies recorded, the human dimension of the attacks remains as compelling and as heartbreaking as the events themselves. The archivist carefully slides the final pages back into the folder. The label reads, "Trial pending." The rest of the details, motives, answers, and full resolution remain to be revealed in the courtroom. For now, the case sits in the archive, a record of violence, courage, and unanswered questions. Each page holds evidence, witness accounts, and photographs that tell the story of a single day that began like any other and ended in terror. This file is a reminder of how quickly ordinary life can be interrupted how fleeting safety can be, and how critical it is to observe the signs before tragedy unfolds. As the folder is closed, the shadowed room falls silent once more. The lamp flickers. The papers rest. And the story of Anthony Williams, its consequences, its victims, and its unanswered questions remains preserved in the archive, waiting for history and justice to catch up. If you'd like to explore more cases from the archive, subscribe and turn on notifications. Your support keeps these stories alive, and it ensures the next file reaches you the moment it's opened.